Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Good morning, Crosspointe. My name's Stephen, and I'm grateful to be able to be the one this morning to welcome you to our online gathering. It's February. Can you even believe it? Time is passing so fast. You may or may not know, but February is Black History Month in America. And the purpose of that is for us to honor the history and the achievements of Black Americans. And so I thought it would be good today to start our service by sharing the story that I've learned of a woman named Hattie Carroll. And she was an African-American hotel barmaid in Baltimore, Maryland in 1963. And while on the job early in 1963, she was tragically murdered by a young, white, wealthy tobacco farm owner just because he was drunk and he didn't value Miss Carroll's life. He was arrested and charged for murder, and then eventually his charges were dropped to manslaughter. And then months later, his sentencing was announced and came out in the news on the very same day that Martin Luther King Jr. in Washington gave his I Have a Dream speech. That day, Bob Dylan read about Miss Carroll's story and decided to write a protest song about it. That's how I learned her story, and that's how I want to share it with you today. So this song is called The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. William Zanzinger killed poor Hattie Carroll with a cane that he twirled round his diamond ring finger at a Baltimore hotel society gathering. And the cops were called in and his weapon took from him as they hauled him in custody down to the station and booked William Zanzinger for first-degree murder. Oh, but you who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fear, take the rag away from your face, 'cause now ain't the time for your tears. William Zanzinger, who at 24 years old owns a tobacco farm of 600 acres, and with rich, wealthy parents who provide and protect him, and high office relations in the politics of Maryland, reacted to his deed with a shrug of his shoulders and with swear words and sneering, and his tongue it was snarling. Within a matter of minutes, on bail, was out walking. Oh, but you who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fear, take the rag away from your face, for your tears. Hattie Carroll was a maid in the kitchen. She was 51 years old and gave birth to 10 children. And she never sat once at the head of the table. And she didn't even talk to the people at the table. And she just cleaned up all the food from the table. And she emptied the ashtrays on a whole other level. She was killed by a blow, lay slain by a cane that sailed through the air and came down from the room, doomed and determined to destroy all the gentle. And she never did nothing to Williams and Zinger. Ah, but you who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fear, take the rag away from your face, 'cause now ain't the time for your tears. In the courtroom of honor, the judge pounded his gavel to show that all's equal and the courts are on the level, and the strings in the system ain't pulled and persuaded, and that even the nobles get properly handled. Once that the cops have chased after and caught 'em, and that the ladder of law has no top or no bottom. He stared at the man who had killed for no reason, who just happened to feel that way without warning. And he spoke through his cloak, most deep and distinguished, and handed out strongly for penalty and repentance to Williams and Zinger a 6-month sentence. And now you who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fears, bury the rag deep in your face, 'cause now is the time for your tears. Bury the rag deep in your face, 'cause now is the time for your tears.
Good morning, Crosspointe family. Thank you for joining us this morning. I wanted to talk to you about a couple of opportunities to connect that are coming up soon. First, if you are the parent of a child ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers, we want to make sure that you know about our February Parenting Lab. That's coming up this Tuesday, February 9th at 7:30 p.m. This month, we're going to talk about the effects of the pandemic on the mental health of our kids. We know that by this point, kids have had long stretches of social isolation from their peers. We know that that's definitely having an effect on their mental health, and it's also creating unique challenges for you as a parent. So we've invited Dr. Bradley Hack, who is a local psychologist, to share some practical tips and wisdom with parents about how you can support the mental health of your kids while still living within all the constraints that COVID life presents. We're inviting you to submit questions ahead of time, and Dr. Hack will address as many of those questions as he can. We're also going to give you an opportunity after he speaks to go into breakout rooms based on the ages of your kids so that you can have conversations with other parents in our community who might be experiencing similar things. If you would like to participate, we encourage you to register. Registration is strongly recommended but not required. You can find more details and the registration at crosspoint.org/events/parenting-labs. Speaking of ways for our students to stay connected, we have an exciting opportunity for our middle school students. We want to invite our middle school students to join us for The Heist, a digital escape room adventure. That's going to take place on Friday, February 19th at 7 o'clock p.m. Students will work in grade level teams to solve puzzles and riddles and mysteries to be the first team to break out of this digital escape room. The top team will receive prizes, and we will be releasing the first part of this digital escape room adventure at Edge Remix, which is our middle school environment. We'll be doing that next Sunday, February 14th at 11 a.m. So if you are a middle school student that wants to participate in this digital escape room adventure, you first want to get all of the preliminary information next Sunday at Edge Remix, and you also want to keep an eye out to the middle school e-news for additional details. But again, the main event is taking place Friday, February 19th at 7 o'clock p.m. We are excited to keep finding ways to connect as a community with each other. If you want to participate in this community, one of the ways that you can do that is to support this community financially. You can give through stocks, PayPal, mail-in checks, debit cards, and you can do all of that by going to crosspoint.org/contribute. Or you can text Crosspointe NC to 77977, and that will send a link to your phone and you can select how you would like to contribute. It is a joy to continue to do life with you, Crosspointe.
We're creation suddenly articulate with 1,000 tongues to fit one cry. From north to south and east to west, we hear Christ be magnified. With the whole earth echoing his eminence, his name would burst from sea and sky. From rivers to the mountain tops, we hear Christ be magnified. Christ Anyone in right should him our praise. We'll sing Christ be magnified.
I want to share with you an interaction that we find written down by one of Jesus' earliest followers named Luke near the very end of his account of Jesus' life and teachings. Now, to give you a little bit of context surrounding when this took place, at this point where the story picks up, Jesus has been crucified on the cross. 3 days later, he had been resurrected, but only a few of his followers have seen him by this point. Others are aware that his tomb is empty, but they're still very skeptical because they haven't seen Jesus for themselves. However, most of his followers aren't even aware of the rumor of resurrection because, after all, there was no way to spread news immediately across a population like there is today. Instead, the only context that most of them had was what they had seen a few days before: that Jesus had been crucified, that he's dead, and buried in a tomb. So that's the context for the scene that takes place here at the end of Luke's account when he writes this. Now that same day, now when it says that same day, it's referring to the day that some of Jesus' disciples had gone to his tomb themselves and discovered it was empty. That same day, two of them, and so he's referring to two of Jesus' followers, were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And they talked and discussed these things with each other. And Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. Now, let me just say, I'm not sure how that works or why that's the case. I mean, we could speculate all day long, but no one really knows. Then it says, he asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. And one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." Now, to help us feel the weight of the situation, we have to put ourselves in the mindset of these two followers of Jesus at this particular moment. These were two people who had left everything to follow Jesus. They knew the scriptures and they knew the prophecies about the Messiah. They had put the pieces together and over time, after 3 years of following Jesus, they had come to believe that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah, the rescuer. You see, for generations, the Jewish people had been brutally oppressed by Rome. And the Jewish hope was that God would send a Messiah, a rescuer, that he would come as this conquering military king and that he would overthrow the Roman oppressors and that the Jewish people would rule in Jerusalem as God's chosen people. And so in following Jesus, there was this very tangible sense with these disciples that their time had finally come. That Jesus was the one to put them back as a people, back on top, and end the oppression. But instead, Jesus ends up being crucified and killed on a Roman cross. Now today, a cross for Christians serves as a symbol of hope, a symbol of victory through sacrificial love. But again, we have to put ourselves in these guys' context. If you're them, a cross was not a sign of great victory over oppressors. Rather, the cross was a sign of the oppressor's victory over you. Specifically, Rome's victory over you with power and violence. And so when their Messiah died, understand their hope died with him. Look again what they said there in verse 21. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. We had hoped. But Rome had its way again. The empire, the powers that be, had their way again. We had hoped that this time it would be different. But I guess it's always just going to be this way. And the more and more I find myself listening to people these days, so many of us carry a similar sense where we had hoped that life would finally start to get easier in 2021 rather than just feeling like it just kept piling on with more hardship and heartache. We had hoped that fractured relationships with family and loved ones could have found a way to heal by now rather than the divide only seeming to grow farther apart. We had hoped that our prayers would have been answered by now, that we'd be pregnant by now, that we'd be in a relationship by now, that this relationship would have turned out differently by now. We had hoped. And we had hoped that job interview number 15 would finally be the one, that our finances and our future would feel way more secure than they do. We had hoped that we would get another opportunity, another chance to do that thing, to say that thing that we wish we had done and said before. We had hoped that COVID-19 still wouldn't be killing people at record pace nearly 1 year into this pandemic. We had hoped that 1 year later we weren't still having to beg some people to wear a mask and wear it properly. We had hoped that we could have spent more of the unexpected time we've been given this past year in ways other than just trying to survive and desperately trying to just hold our own mess together. We had hoped that we weren't constantly worried about our kids' mental health as well as our own. We had hoped that if we had raised our kids a particular way, that we could guarantee a particular outcome for their lives. We had hoped that by now we'd be safely back out in public without the anxiety of whether someone is standing too close or in the same space for too long, that we'd be safely back in school, safely back in restaurants and concerts and sporting events. Heck, we had even hoped that our favorite college basketball team would play in such a way that would bring a little more happiness into this cold winter season rather than adding on to the despair. We had hoped. We had hoped that we still wouldn't find ourselves in 2021 having to expend so much energy to simply try to convince people about the reality of racial injustice and white supremacy and the full equality of all genders and orientations and the affirmation of our LGBTQ plus siblings. We had hoped at this point in history that simply declaring Black Lives Matter wouldn't spark all sorts of defensiveness and resistance and could be met with instead a simple yes, of course, absolutely, by every white person in America. We had hoped that those who first introduced us to Jesus and taught us to above all love our neighbors as ourselves wouldn't have been so blinded by partisan political loyalties and the destruction of an opponent to the point where common decency and integrity and respect and kindness became luxury somehow rather than the essentials in the cultural discourse. We had hoped that the churches and Christians that raised many of us could handle us asking big questions about God and wrestling deeply and boldly with our faith, believing that a living and active Spirit of God just might perhaps have some fresh insights to share with us for this culture, for this world today, about how we love our neighbor now without labeling us as dangerous or heretics. Friends, we have hoped for so many things. And often we can be left wondering, is this always going to be the way things are? And it's very tempting to just give into that, to spiral down into cynicism and let that cynicism shape how we view everything to the point where we simply start to believe in our hearts, this is how it will always be. Things are always going to be this way. Rome is always going to win. But you see, here's something important for you and I to understand. What you and I believe about the future dictates how you and I will be in the present. What we believe about the future dictates our attitude, our perspective, our choices. It dictates how you and I go through life. Now, I want you to notice something else in this story at the end of Luke. Look at what happens in verse 17 before these followers say, we had hoped Jesus was the one. Luke writes this. He says, they stood still, their faces downcast. Here's the thing I want us to think about. Something happens when we choose to stop walking. Right? When we choose to stand still. We lose our imagination, any sense of creativity in terms of how things could ever be different. We become paralyzed in the moment and can't see anything except what is right in front of us. And in moments of great disappointment and heartache, that's easy to do. But notice what Jesus does next. Jesus says to them, did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And so essentially, Jesus says, you're only seeing what's right in front of you at the moment. And so he begins to remind them of the narrative, of the story that God has been weaving throughout history. So he starts with Moses and he goes through the various prophets of the Old Testament and he paints for them a much bigger picture than just what they had seen right in front of them. And he reminds them that suffering and pain, brokenness and grief, while intensely real, do not have the final word in life. That often we're tempted to put a period on the end of the sentence and say, it's done, it's over, even I'm done, I'm over. And how when we're tempted to put a period at the end of the sentence, God invites us to put a comma. To trust that suffering and pain, even death, doesn't have the final word in life. The Apostle Paul writes a letter to the Christians in Rome, these followers of Jesus who had endured a tremendous amount of threat and hardship. And he writes this, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame. You see, Paul, he links these two ideas of suffering and hope. And I think that's one of the key differentiators between optimism and hope, because often we hear optimism. When we hear that word optimism, it can come off rather naive and even annoying because it can get presented at times as, listen, there's just an easy solution to all this. I can fix this, no problem. Or it sounds like, listen, we just have to think positive thoughts. Nothing bad's going to happen. Everything's going to turn out great. But whenever someone presents something that way to you, whether it's a leader or a manager or a friend or family member, while well-intentioned, it's rarely inspirational. Because again, it can come across rather naive. And so I think there's a reason that Paul links the idea of suffering with hope, because typically the people who have hope are the ones who actually know how difficult life can be, how painful certain situations can be. Yet when they have persevered, when they have stayed in it and kept putting commas at the end of sentences rather than periods, it began to grow hope in them. And they think, that thing that could have knocked me out, that thing that could have crushed me, when something like that comes around again, I know I can get back up. Fear doesn't dominate me like it once did. Again, Paul writes, we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame. You see, optimism is, oh yeah, you can do that. No big thing. Everything's going to be fine. But hope is, Yeah, you can do that. We can do that. Now, it may take a while and it may be painful along the way and it may involve a lot of tears and a lot of hard work and we may have to try several different routes, but at some point, we're going to get there. You see, often the thing that marks hope is that it's earned. It's hope that's been through doubt and betrayal and loss and disappointment and pain and ridicule, because that's what actually makes you hopeful, which is very different than mere optimism. Because again, hope embraces the whole narrative. Hope doesn't shy away from the gut-wrenching moments and seasons that brought us to where we are today. Which, back to this story in Luke, it's why I think Jesus starts reminding these followers of the bigger narrative and story that they're a part of in this tradition of faith, so they can see more than the moment right in front of them. Because the reality is, and this is true of all of us, when you and I don't have a larger narrative that's guiding us, that's driving our perspective and our decisions, when suffering comes, our primary goal can easily just become relief. All we can think about is getting relief however we can get it. But when you have a narrative larger than your own comfort that's guiding you, you'll walk through pain. I mean, that's true in any area of your life, right? It's true in sports, it's true in business and exercise and relationships. It's pausing long enough to ask the question, what kind of story do I want to tell by how I walk through this? We've been in this series, Heart Knower, the last several weeks, and this question gets to the heart of that. What are the things that I want to mark the larger narrative of my life? What kind of story does my heart want to tell through this? Maybe it's something like, you know what I want my life to tell, the story I want to tell is a story of integrity or of kindness or perseverance or hope. Whatever it is, it's pausing long enough to ask the question, what kind of story do I want to tell by how I walk through this? Because without a larger narrative, whenever difficulty comes, relief defaults to becoming the primary goal. And sometimes we seek that relief through numbing it or trying to escape the pain. And we tend to do that in all sorts of ways that are destructive to ourselves, destructive to other people that we care about and love. But regardless, many times the end result is that we stop walking. We stop putting one foot in front of the other. Notice what the Apostle Peter writes. He says, "Praise be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead." And I love that phrase he uses there, that he has given us new birth into a living hope. You see, it's a hope that walks. A hope that refuses to stand still and become paralyzed in despair. It's a hope that puts commas where it's tempting to put periods. A hope that understands it can do hard things, where hope is earned. And again, to be very clear, it's not a weak, naive, rose-colored glasses kind of hope. It's a hope that can acknowledge that a situation is broken, that a situation is messed up. It's a hope that can grieve and mourn the way things are. It's a hope that fights to see new possibilities, that acknowledges the darkness, but refuses to give into the cynicism that darkness is all that there is. It's a hope that recognizes even if current circumstances don't change, God can change me. God can change us. And that's possible when our hope walks. And understand, more often than not, that hope and that walk won't feel like a frolicking through the daisies kind of hope, but rather much more like a tired, questioning, one foot barely in front of the other kind of hope. A determined trudge, crawling on our knees through the desert kind of hope, but it's one that keeps moving and keeps walking. And so as we wrap this up, I want to offer you 3 practical suggestions to help your hope walking, moving forward. And I'd like to encourage you to check out this website. First thing is projecthopeexchange.com. projecthopeexchange.com. It's a website where you can both give and receive some hope, hence the name Project Hope Exchange. And on the site, you'll find these 30-second audio submissions from people who have been through all sorts of different challenges. So whatever you're going through, whether it's a physical challenge or a mental or emotional challenge or just a life situation challenge, you can search through dozens and dozens of different circumstances and select the one maybe that you're facing right now. And then you can listen to 30-second stories of firsthand accounts of other human beings who have gone through that situation and found some hope. And additionally, one of the things that helps give ourselves hope is when we can give hope to others. And so they've also made it easier for you to record your own 30-second story where you can pass on hope to someone else around the globe who might be going through something very similar as you. And so it's an easy, simple, but important way we can serve one another to make sure that our hope keeps walking. Here's a second thing I want to invite you to do. I want you to Google these two words, hope scale. Well, you can grab your phone right now, or you can open up a different browser on your computer, whatever you want to do. Feel free to do it right now if you want to. Just Google hope scale. And very likely the first link that's going to pop up is from the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. So click on that link and then scroll down to the bottom and you'll see where it says to download the questionnaire, click here, and it will say Adult Hope Scale. And so when you click on it, it's going to pull up 12 questions that you can answer very easily in less than 2 minutes. It's going to tell you on the survey which question numbers to add up at the end, and you'll end up with two numbers, what they call the agency score and the pathway score. Okay, now here's why I think this can be helpful. According to psychotherapist Brendan Street, hope has two essential parts to it. There's the agency, which is maybe better thought of as maybe willpower. It's this idea of being motivated and feeling confident that you can achieve your goals. It's having the will to try and the belief that if you do, you can reach and attain those goals. Then there's the pathway, which perhaps you can think of, let's call it way power, which is being able to think of many different ways to achieve something, different ways of getting from where you are today to where you can be. Because you see, willpower without way power is just a wish. And way power without willpower is just being optimistic. And so hope, in order to walk, needs both. So the hope scale, it's a quick way to see if perhaps you need more help with motivation, or maybe you need more help figuring out different strategies or paths towards your goal. This way, as you journey with different people and as you ask for help, you're going to be able to pinpoint easier what kind of help will best serve you. And then lastly, I want to encourage you, if you're able, to go outside and literally take a walk. To literally put legs on this metaphor that hope walks. And so after this is over, sometime this afternoon, you've got time before the Super Bowl, you'll be fine. And I get it might be a little cold, it may be even drizzly or rainy a little bit. But that just gives the metaphor all the more life because we have to learn to do hard things. So dress warmly and then just take a little bit of a walk. One foot in front of the other. And as you do, I want to invite you to consider some things. Consider some of the things that you've been hoping for. Things that you've hoped would have been different or could have been different. And as you keep walking, I want you to also take some moments and reflect back through the larger narrative of your life, things that you persevered through that you had no idea at the time how you could. And yet here you are, still walking. And then as you keep going along, that you'd be reminded, this is the story that I'm a part of. This walk. This is the tradition I'm a part of and that others have been a part of for thousands of years, where we are people of hope. Where not even death shuts the options down for the kind of redemption and resurrection that are possible. And so a gift to give one another and a gift we give ourselves is to simply keep walking, because when we stop walking, hope stops with it. And what all of us know deep down inside, is that all great stories, all great movies, all the lives of people that inspire us and motivate us are the ones that keep walking through pain and difficulty. Who even in the face of hardship, in In the face of doubts and questions, keep putting one foot in front of the other. That those who give up in the face of difficulty or never really face any challenges at all, those stories never are inspiring to us, but instead it's the ones who keep walking, who keep hoping when it seems much easier to give up, who understand that hope is an effort and that hope is earned. And so Crosspointe, here's to being a people who keep walking together.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.